The first grave she planted was for a child nobody claimed, and Levi Brennan watched from across the dusty road as the woman in the faded calico dress knelt in dirt that held too many secrets. The New Mexico sun beat down on Abiquiu that afternoon in the summer of 1878, turning everything to shades of brown and gold, except for the small packet of wildflower seeds clutched in her weathered hands. Levi had just ridden into town looking for work, his horse tired, and his pockets nearly empty after a difficult spring. He stood outside the general store, a tall man of 26 with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of desert sage. The woman caught his attention not because she was beautiful, though something in her bearing suggested she might have been once, but because she was crying as she scattered those seeds over the unmarked mound of earth in the potter's field just beyond the church. "Who is she?" Levi asked the storekeeper who had stepped outside to sweep the boardwalk. "That's Fiona Sutton, school teacher. Well, she was until the school closed down last month for lack of funds." The old man paused in his sweeping. "She's taken it upon herself to tend those graves out there. Been doing it near about 3 weeks now. Plants wildflowers on every unmarked one she can find. Why wildflowers? Says every person deserves to be remembered, even if nobody knows their name. Says the flowers will remember for us." The storekeeper shook his head, but there was fondness in the gesture. "She's a peculiar one, but her heart's in the right place." Levi watched as Fiona stood, brushing the dirt from her skirt, her face tilted toward the sky as if seeking some answer in the clouds. Her hair was dark and pinned back simply, and even from this distance, he could see the set of determination in her shoulders. Something about her called to the lonely places in his chest, the parts of him that had been wandering too long without purpose. The next morning, Levi found himself at the edge of the potter's field with a shovel he had borrowed from the livery stable where he had managed to secure work mucking stalls. Fiona was already there, kneeling beside another grave, this one so old the wooden marker had rotted away completely. She looked up as his shadow fell across the ground. Her eyes were brown, he noticed, the kind of brown that held warmth even when the rest of her expression remained guarded. "Can I help you, mister?" Her voice was softer than he expected, touched with an accent that spoke of the South, somewhere far from this harsh desert country. "Thought you might need some help." He gestured with the shovel. "Ground's pretty hard. Flowers might take better if someone worked the soil first." Fiona studied him for a long moment, her hand still clutching a packet of seeds. Why would you want to help? It was a fair question, and Levi found he did not have a simple answer. "Because it seems like the right thing to do," he finally said. "Because you should not have to do it alone." Something shifted in her expression, a crack in whatever wall she had built around herself. She nodded once, sharp and decisive. "That grave there needs tending. The soil's compacted. If you could break it up, I'll add some of the good earth I brought from the creek bed." They worked in silence for the first hour, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised them both. Levi broke up the hard-pan soil while Fiona mixed in the richer earth, her movements practiced and efficient. When the ground was ready, she scattered the seeds with the same reverence he had witnessed the day before, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer. "I'm Levi Brennan," he said when they paused to drink from the water canteen he had brought. "Fiona Sutton." She accepted the canteen with a nod of thanks. "You are new in town. Arrived yesterday. Found work at the livery." "That's honest work." She handed back the canteen, and their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange, better than what most men around here do. There was a story in those words, something bitter and painful, but Levi did not press. They returned to their work, and by the time the sun reached its zenith, they had prepared 3 more graves for planting. "How many are there?" Levi asked, looking out over the field of unmarked mounds. 23 that I have found so far, but there might be more. The records at the church are incomplete, and some of these graves are old enough that nobody remembers who rests here. Fiona's voice caught slightly. Some are children, some are drifters who died passing through. Some are women who the town wanted to forget. And you think planting flowers will change that? She turned to face him fully, and he saw a fierce light in her eyes. I think every soul deserves to be mourned. I think being forgotten is the worst kind of death. These flowers, they'll come back every spring. Long after we're gone, they'll remember. Someone will see them and know that a person is buried here, that someone cared enough to mark the spot with beauty instead of letting them disappear into nothing. The passion in her words struck something deep in Levi's chest. He had spent years drifting from town to town, working cattle drives and breaking horses, never staying long enough to put down roots. He had always told himself he liked the freedom, but standing here in this field of forgotten souls, he wondered if perhaps he was just afraid of being forgotten himself. "I'll help you," he said. "For as long as it takes." Fiona's eyes widened slightly. "You do not even know me. I know enough. I know you care about things most people ignore. That's more than I can say for most folks I've met." A small smile touched her lips, the first he had seen from her. It transformed her face, making her not just pretty but genuinely beautiful. "Then I accept your help, Levi Brennan. Tomorrow morning, same time, I'll be here." True to his word, Levi met Fiona at the potter's field the next morning and every morning after that. He worked at the livery from midday until evening, but his mornings belonged to the graves and to the woman who tended them. They fell into a pattern, comfortable and right in a way that made Levi's chest ache with something he could not quite name. As they worked, they talked. Fiona told him about growing up in Georgia, the daughter of a Baptist preacher who had believed in the fundamental dignity of every human soul. She spoke of how she had come west after her father's death, seeking a fresh start in a place where the war's shadows did not fall quite so heavily. "I loved teaching," she said one morning as they worked on a grave she suspected belonged to a Chinese railroad worker based on its location and age. "The children here, they're so hungry for knowledge, for a chance at something better. But the town council decided educated children were less important than a new saloon." The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. Levi paused in his digging to look at her. "That must have hurt." "Everything hurts out here," she said quietly. "This country takes, and most people just accept it. That's why I started coming here. I could not save my school, but I could do this. I could give these forgotten people something beautiful." Levi thought about that as he returned to breaking up the hard earth. He had spent so many years just surviving, moving from place to place, never stopping to think about what kind of mark he would leave on the world. Watching Fiona scatter seeds over nameless graves, he realized she was doing something that would last long after she was gone. These flowers would bloom year after year, a living memorial. "What about you?" Fiona asked, settling beside him to mix in the good soil. "Where do you come from?" "Kansas, originally. My family had a farm, but after my parents died of fever when I was 17, I sold it off and started drifting. That was 9 years ago, been moving ever since. No siblings. I had a younger sister. She died in the same fever that took my parents." The words still hurt, even after all these years. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone remembers her except me. We were too poor for a proper stone." Fiona's hand found his, her fingers closing around his calloused palm. The touch sent warmth spreading through him. "What was her name?" "Margaret." "She was only 12. Margaret Brennan," Fiona said softly, as if committing it to memory. "She was loved by her brother, and he has carried her memory for 9 years. She is not forgotten." Levi's throat tightened. He had not spoken about Margaret to anyone in years, had tried to bury the grief along with his old life. But something about Fiona made him want to remember, made the pain feel like something other than a burden. "Thank you," he managed. They sat there for a moment, hands still joined, surrounded by the graves of strangers who had become their shared purpose. When Fiona finally pulled away to finish planting the seeds, Levi felt the loss of her touch like a physical thing. The days turned into weeks, and the wildflowers began to sprout. Tiny green shoots pushed through the hard earth, miraculous in their persistence. Fiona checked on them every day, carrying water from the creek when the rain did not come. Levi helped her haul the heavy buckets, his muscles aching in a way that felt good, purposeful. They drew attention, of course. Abiquiu was small enough that any deviation from routine became the subject of gossip. Levi heard the whispers at the livery, the speculation about what exactly he and the schoolteacher were doing out in that field every morning. Some of it was kind, most of it was not, but he ignored it all. What they were doing mattered more than what small minds thought about it. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red, Fiona remained at the field after their work was done. Levi had been about to head to the livery when he noticed her standing among the graves, her face tilted up toward the light. "Something wrong?" he asked, walking back to her. "No, I just wanted to see how they look in this light." She gestured to the small green shoots scattered across the field. "In a few weeks, they'll start blooming. All this death will be covered in color and life. It feels like a miracle, does it not?" "It does," Levi agreed, but he was not looking at the flowers. He was looking at her, at the way the sunset turned her hair to fire and made her skin glow. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness, and everything to do with the fierce, tender spirit that animated her. Fiona turned and caught him staring. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them seemed to thicken with something unspoken, something that had been building since that first morning when he had offered to help. "Levi," she said softly, and his name on her lips was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. "Fiona." He took a step closer. "I need you to know something. When I rode into this town, I was just looking for a place to rest for a while before moving on. That was my plan. It has always been my plan." He paused, searching for the right words. "But then I saw you planting flowers on graves nobody else cared about, and something changed. I do not want to move on anymore. I want to stay. I want to help you finish what you started here. I want to know you, really know you, if you'll let me." Fiona's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I have been alone for a long time," she whispered. "I learned to be alone because it hurt less than caring and losing people. But these past weeks with you, I have remembered what it feels like to not be alone. I have remembered what it feels like to have someone who sees the same things I see, who cares about the same things I care about." "Then let me stay," Levi said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and cupped her face gently in his hands. "Let me stay and see what we could build together." "Yes," she breathed, and then she was kissing him, rising up on her toes to press her lips to his. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise. Levi pulled her closer, feeling her arms wrap around his neck, her fingers threading into his hair. He had kissed women before, but this was different. This felt like coming home after a long journey, like finding something he had not known he was searching for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fiona rested her forehead against his chest. "The town will talk," she said. "Let them talk. My reputation is already questionable after I made such a fuss about the school closing. Your reputation is that you care about people, even dead ones. Anyone who thinks poorly of you for that is a fool." Levi tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. "I mean it, Fiona. I do not care what they say. I care about you." She smiled then, radiant and unguarded. "I care about you too, more than I probably should after only a few weeks. My mother used to say that the heart knows what it wants faster than the head can figure it out." Levi kissed her forehead gently. "I think my heart knew the first time I saw you crying over that child's grave. It knew you were someone special, someone worth staying for." They stood there as the sky darkened to purple and the first stars appeared. Around them, the tiny shoots of wildflowers rustled in the evening breeze, a promise of the beauty to come. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened alongside their work in the potter's field. Levi found excuses to see Fiona throughout the day, stopping by her small rented room with offerings of fresh bread from the bakery or wildflowers he had picked on the outskirts of town. She would laugh at the irony of giving her more flowers, but she always accepted them, always tucked them into a jar on her windowsill. They ate dinner together most evenings, either at the boarding house where Fiona lived or outside under the stars. Levi learned that she loved to read, that she had brought a small trunk full of books with her from Georgia and had read each one at least 3 times. Fiona discovered that Levi had a talent for storytelling, spinning tales of his years on the trail that made her laugh until her sides ached. The wildflowers began to bloom in late August, just as Fiona had predicted. The transformation of the potter's field was stunning. Where there had been only bare earth and forgotten graves, there now stretched a carpet of color. Indian blankets in red and yellow, bluebonnets standing tall and proud, Mexican hats swaying in the breeze and scattered throughout, the delicate purple blooms of prairie verbena. The townspeople began to take notice. They would walk past the field and stop, staring at the unexpected beauty. Some of them began to ask questions, curious about who was buried there, wondering if their own lost relatives might be among the unmarked graves. Fiona kept meticulous records of which graves they had tended, making notes about location and any details she could glean from church records or local memory. When people came to her with questions, she would consult her carefully drawn map and do her best to help them find their lost ones. One afternoon, an old Mexican woman approached Fiona at the field. Her face was weathered by time and sun, her hands twisted with age, but her eyes were clear and sharp. "My grandson," she said in heavily accented English. "He died 10 years ago. He was only 15. The town, they did not want to bury him in the church cemetery because his father was Apache. They put him here, but I do not know where." Fiona's face softened with sympathy. "What was his name?" Miguel Torres." Levi watched as Fiona consulted her notes, then checked the church records she had copied into a worn leather journal. Her finger traced down the page until it stopped. "Here," she said softly. "I think this is him. The notation says boy, mixed blood, age about 15, died August 1868. That matches what you told me." The old woman's eyes filled with tears. "Can you show me?" Fiona led her to a grave near the eastern edge of the field, one they had planted with bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush. The flowers were in full bloom, a riot of blue and red against the pale earth. "Here," Fiona said gently. "Your Miguel rests here." The old woman sank to her knees, her gnarled hands touching the earth with such tenderness that Levi felt his own eyes burn. She began to speak in Spanish, words Levi did not understand but recognized as prayer. Fiona knelt beside her, one hand on the woman's shoulder in silent support. When the prayers were finished, the old woman turned to Fiona. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for giving him flowers. Thank you for remembering him." "He will always have flowers now," Fiona promised. "These will come back every year. He will not be forgotten again." After the old woman left, Fiona stood among the graves with tears streaming down her face. Levi pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried. "You did a good thing," he murmured into her hair. "You gave her peace." "She should not have had to search for him for 10 years, Fiona said fiercely. "He should have had a proper marker. He should have been buried with dignity, not shoved into the potter's field because his blood was not pure enough for this town's sensibilities." "I know. But you cannot change what happened. You can only change what happens now." Fiona pulled back to look at him, her eyes red but determined. "I want to put markers on these graves, real ones. Wood at least if we cannot afford stone. Everyone should know that the people buried here had names, had lives, that they mattered." "Then that is what we will do," Levi said without hesitation. "I know a bit of woodworking. We can make markers for the ones we know the names of. For the others, we can at least mark that someone is buried there." They began the new project that very week. Levi bought wood from the sawmill with money he had saved from his work at the livery. In the evenings, after his work was done, he would sit outside the boarding house and carve markers while Fiona sat beside him, reading aloud from her books or simply talking about her day. The first marker was for Miguel Torres. Levi carved his name carefully into the smooth pine, along with the dates Fiona had found in the church records. They painted the letters black so they would stand out, then coated the whole thing in linseed oil to protect it from the weather. When it was ready, they took it to his grave together and drove it into the earth at the head of the flowers. The old woman, whose name they learned was Senora Torres, wept when she saw it and pressed a small wooden crucifix into Fiona's hands as thanks. Word spread quickly about what they were doing. Other families came forward, asking if their lost loved ones might be among the unmarked graves. Fiona helped where she could, matching names to locations through patient research and careful questioning. Levi made marker after marker, his hands growing skilled at the delicate work of carving letters into wood. Some graves remained unnamed, but even those received markers. Levi carved simple wooden crosses for them, and Fiona would add a phrase she had taken to heart: "Known to God." It was not much, but it was something. It was acknowledgement that a person had lived and died and deserved to be remembered. As fall approached and the wildflowers began to fade, Levi realized he had put down roots deeper than he ever had before. He no longer thought about moving on, about finding the next town or the next job. He thought about Fiona, about their work together, about the life they were building one marker at a time. One evening in late September, as they sat together on the steps of the boarding house watching the sun set, Levi took Fiona's hand in his. "Marry me," he said simply. Fiona turned to stare at him, her eyes wide. "What? Marry me?" he repeated. "I know it has not been that long, but I know what I want. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to help you plant flowers and make markers and fight for the forgotten people of this world. I want to build a life with you, Fiona. A real life, with a home and maybe someday children and everything that comes with it. Say yes." "Levi," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Are you certain? I am not an easy woman. I am stubborn and opinionated, and I make people uncomfortable with my ideas about justice and dignity." "I know all that. It is why I love you." The words came out easily, natural as breathing. "You make me want to be better than I was. You make me want to stay and fight instead of running. You make me believe that one person can make a difference in this hard world. So yes, I am certain." I have never been more certain of anything. Tears spilled down Fiona's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Levi Brennan. I love your kind heart and your strong hands and the way you see the same injustices I see and want to fix them just as much." "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her there on the steps as the last light faded from the sky, and it felt like a beginning, like the first seeds of something that would grow and bloom and last. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small Catholic church. Father Martinez, who had been quietly supportive of their work in the potter's field, performed the service with obvious pleasure. Senora Torres and several other families whose loved ones they had found attended, along with a handful of townspeople who had been moved by their project. Fiona wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton, and Levi had bought a new shirt for the occasion. They spoke their vows with steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. When Father Martinez pronounced them husband and wife, Levi kissed his bride and knew that he had finally found the home he had been searching for all these years. They rented a small house on the outskirts of town, a modest adobe structure with 2 rooms and a kitchen. It was not much, but it was theirs. Levi continued working at the livery, and Fiona took in sewing and mending to help make ends meet. But their true work continued in the potter's field. As winter approached, they prepared the graves for the cold months ahead. The flowers had gone to seed, which Fiona carefully collected and stored for replanting in the spring. They finished the last of the markers for known graves and planted bulbs that would bloom early, gifts from a traveling merchant who had heard about their project and wanted to contribute. One cold December morning, Levi found Fiona sitting among the graves, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. He sat beside her, putting his arm around her to share his warmth. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how different my life is now compared to a year ago. Last winter, I was alone and purposeless, angry at the world and feeling like nothing I did mattered. Now I have you and we have this." She gestured at the field of markers and dormant flower beds. "We have given these people their dignity back. We have helped families find peace." "That matters, Levi. It really matters." "You matter," he said, pulling her closer. "You mattered before I ever showed up, but I am grateful I get to be part of this with you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the winter sun climb higher in the clear New Mexico sky. Then Fiona spoke again, her voice soft and wondering. "Levi, I think I might be with child." He went very still, afraid to move or breathe or do anything that might make this moment less real. "Are you certain?" "No, not completely, but I have been feeling different and my courses have not come." "It is too early to be sure, but I think so, I hope so." Joy surged through Levi's chest, so powerful it almost hurt. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." Fiona turned to look at him, searching his face. "You are happy about this?" "Happy," he laughed, pulling her into his lap and holding her close. "Fiona, I am more than happy. I am overjoyed, terrified but overjoyed. We are going to be parents." She laughed too, the sound bright and clear in the cold air. "We are going to be terrible at it at first, probably, but we will figure it out together. We will teach our child to see the dignity in every person, to remember the forgotten, to plant beauty in hard places. We will teach them to care, just like you do." "Just like we do," Fiona corrected, pressing her forehead to his. "You care just as much as I do, Levi. You saw these graves and decided they mattered. You made markers with your own hands. You chose to stay and fight for something bigger than yourself. Our child will learn that from both of us." They sat there holding each other as the winter sun climbed higher, surrounded by the graves they had tended and the markers they had made. It felt right, being there in that place that had brought them together, making plans for the future while honoring the past. Fiona was indeed pregnant, and as her belly grew round with their child, they continued their work in the potter's field. In the spring, the bulbs they had planted bloomed first, filling the field with early color. Then came the wildflowers, more abundant than ever after a wet winter. The potter's field had become a garden, a memorial that spoke of love and remembrance. The town's attitude toward the field had changed over the months. What had once been a forgotten corner where the unwanted dead were buried had become a point of pride. Visitors would come to Abiquiu and hear about the beautiful memorial garden, about the couple who had decided that every life deserved to be honored. Some people began to call it the Garden of Remembrance, though Fiona preferred to simply call it the field. Their daughter was born on a warm June evening in 1879, arriving with the sunset. She had Levi's gray-green eyes and Fiona's dark hair, and they named her Margaret Rose, after Levi's sister and the wild roses that grew near the creek. Levi held his daughter for the first time with tears streaming down his face. "She is perfect," he whispered, looking at Fiona with such love it made her heart ache. "She is ours," Fiona agreed, exhausted but radiant. "Our little flower." As Margaret grew, she became a fixture at the field with her parents. Fiona would carry her in a sling against her chest while she tended the flowers, talking to her about the people buried there, about why it was important to remember. Levi would let her tiny hands help him paint letters on the markers, guiding her fingers with his much larger ones. By the time Margaret was 2, she could toddle around the field on her own, and she showed the same reverence for the place that her parents did. She would place small stones on the graves, her own childish way of showing respect. Watching her, Levi and Fiona knew they were raising someone who would care about the world the way they did. The field was never truly finished. There were always more flowers to plant, markers to maintain, families to help. But that was the point, Levi came to realize. It was not about completing a project and moving on. It was about the steady, daily work of remembering, of choosing to see dignity in every human life, even those the world had deemed unimportant. Fiona reopened a small school in their home when Margaret was 3, teaching children whose families could not afford the newly rebuilt schoolhouse. She charged nothing for those who could not pay and accepted vegetables or labor for those who could offer something. Levi built desks and shelves, and their home became a place of learning and growth. They had 2 more children, a son named Henry William when Margaret was 4, and another daughter, Clara Jane, 3 years after that. Their house, which had once seemed spacious for 2, grew crowded and loud and full of life. Levi added rooms as he could afford the materials, learning carpentry through trial and error, and the help of neighbors who had become friends. Through it all, the field remained at the center of their lives. It was where they had met, where they had fallen in love, where they had learned what it meant to care for something bigger than themselves. Every spring, they replanted and tended. Every time they learned a new name for one of the graves, Levi carved a new marker. The field grew more beautiful with each passing year, a living testament to the power of remembrance. When Margaret was 10, old enough to understand, Fiona took her to the grave that had started everything, the child's grave that had first drawn Levi's attention all those years ago. They had never learned the child's name, but the marker Levi had made bore the words "Child of God," forever remembered. "This is where your father and I first truly saw each other," Fiona told her daughter. "I was planting flowers because I could not bear the thought of this child being forgotten. Your father saw me and decided to help. That choice changed both of our lives." Margaret looked up at her mother with serious eyes. "Because you fell in love, because we found purpose together. The love came from that. Your father could have ridden on through Abiquiu and never looked back. But he chose to see what I was doing as important. He chose to stay and help. He planted his heart here in this field just like we planted these flowers." "You think the child knows?" Margaret asked, touching the weathered wooden marker gently. "You think they know someone cares?" "I like to think so," Fiona said softly. But even if they do not, we know, and that matters. Caring matters even when the ones we care for cannot thank us, especially then. Margaret nodded, absorbing this lesson the way she absorbed everything her parents taught her. Then she did something that made Fiona's eyes fill with tears. She pulled a small handful of wildflower seeds from her pocket and scattered them over the grave. "So they will have new flowers," she explained simply. Fiona pulled her daughter close, understanding that the work she and Levi had started would continue long after they were gone. They were raising children who understood the value of remembrance, of dignity, of caring for the forgotten. That was a legacy more lasting than any stone monument. The years passed with the rhythm of seasons. The children grew tall and strong, learning their letters from Fiona and how to work with their hands from Levi. The field continued to bloom each spring, a constant in a world that often felt uncertain. Families still came to find their lost ones, and Levi still carved markers, though his hands were not as steady as they once had been. When Levi turned 40, Fiona threw him a small party with just their family and a few close friends. They sat in the field, now officially renamed the Garden of Remembrance by the town council, and ate cake while the children ran among the flowers. "You know what I was thinking," Levi said, watching his children play. "When I am gone, I want to be buried here. Not in the church cemetery, but here, with all these people we have tended all these years." Fiona took his hand, squeezing tight. "That is a long time away. Maybe. But when the time comes, this is where I want to be. This place is holy to me. It is where I found you, where I found purpose, where I learned what it means to really live instead of just existing." "Then here is where you will rest," Fiona promised. "But not for many, many years. We still have so much living to do." She was right. They had decades still ahead of them. Years filled with watching their children grow and marry and have children of their own. Margaret became a teacher like her mother, carrying on the tradition of educating anyone who wanted to learn regardless of their ability to pay. Henry studied law and became a voice for those who had none, fighting against the injustices his parents had taught him to see. Clara stayed in Abiquiu and took over the care of the field, planting new varieties of wildflowers and maintaining the markers with the same love her parents had shown. The field expanded over the years as the town grew. More graves were added, but now every single one was marked and tended. No one was buried in Abiquiu without their name being recorded, without flowers being planted, without dignity being granted. It became known across New Mexico. This unusual garden where the dead rested beneath blankets of wildflowers and every grave bore witness to a life that had mattered. Fiona lived to be 73, still sharp and fierce until the very end. She died in the spring when the wildflowers were in full bloom and was buried in the field she had created, beneath bluebonnets and Indian blankets. Her marker, carved by Levi's gnarled but still capable hands, read Fiona Sutton Brennan. She taught us all to remember. Levi mourned her deeply, but without despair. He knew that she lived on in their children, in the field, in every wildflower that bloomed and every marker that bore a forgotten name. He tended her grave every day, talking to her as he had when she was alive, keeping her updated on the children and grandchildren and the progress of the flowers. He lived 3 more years without her, long enough to see Clara's first daughter born and named Fiona in honor of her grandmother. Long enough to watch the field bloom through 3 more springs, each one more beautiful than the last. Long enough to know that the work they had started would continue long after he was gone. On a warm morning in late May, Levi died peacefully in his sleep, a smile on his weathered face. His children buried him beside Fiona in the field they had created together, beneath the same wildflowers that had brought them together all those years ago. Clara carved his marker herself, having learned the craft from watching her father work. The words she chose were simple but perfect. Levi Brennan, he planted his heart here and it grew into love. The field continued to bloom year after year, generation after generation. The story of how it came to be passed into local legend. The tale of the schoolteacher who decided every grave deserved flowers and the cowboy who had helped her plant them. Children grew up playing among the flowers, learning the names on the markers, understanding that every person's life had value. Eventually, the garden of remembrance became more than just a potter's field transformed. It became a symbol of what people could create when they chose to care, when they decided that dignity and remembrance mattered more than convenience or prejudice. It became a place where families came to remember their own dead, where children learned about compassion and history, where lovers met among the blooms and promised to build something beautiful together. The original wooden markers were eventually replaced with stone, but the words Levi had carved were faithfully reproduced. Fiona's careful records were preserved in the church and later in the town's historical society, ensuring that the names and stories would never be lost. The wildflowers she had first planted continued to spread and bloom, hardy and persistent, just like the love that had created the garden. Margaret lived to be 92, long enough to see the new century dawn and the automobile replace the horse. But the field remained unchanged, a pocket of wildflowers and memory in a world that was rapidly transforming. She would bring her great-grandchildren there and tell them stories of their great-grandparents, of how a woman's compassion and a man's love had turned a place of forgetting into a place of eternal remembrance. Your great-grandmother believed every person deserved to be mourned, she would tell them, her voice still strong despite her age. Your great-grandfather believed in her enough to stay and help make that belief real. That is what love is, children. It is not just feeling something. It is choosing to build something together, something that lasts beyond your own life. She would take them to the two graves at the heart of the field, beneath the most spectacular display of wildflowers, where Levi and Fiona rested side by side. The stones were weathered now, but the names and words were still clear. The children would place fresh flowers on the graves, continuing the tradition their great-great-grandparents had started. Did they know? One child asked once. Did they know what they were starting would last so long? Margaret smiled, remembering her parents as they had been in their prime, their hands dirty from planting, their faces bright with purpose and love. I think they knew they were building something that mattered. Whether they knew it would last this long, I cannot say. But they knew it was worth doing, worth caring about. They knew that choosing to remember, choosing to honor the dignity in every human life, was never wasted effort. And they loved each other. Oh, they loved each other very much, Margaret confirmed. But more than that, they loved the same things. They both believed in justice and dignity and the importance of remembering. That shared love made their love for each other even stronger. They were partners in every sense of the word. As the sun set over Abiquiu that evening, painting the field in shades of gold and amber, the wildflowers swayed in the breeze. Indian blankets and bluebonnets, prairie verbena and Mexican hats, all the varieties that Fiona had carefully chosen and Levi had helped plant. They bloomed as they had every spring for decades, a living reminder that love, true love, creates beauty that endures. In the years that followed, the Garden of Remembrance became even more significant to the community. During World War I, markers were added for local boys who had died overseas, their names remembered in the place where all names were honored. During the Depression, when times were hard and death came too often, the field remained a constant, its flowers blooming regardless of economic hardship, a reminder that beauty and dignity could exist even in the darkest times. The little adobe house where Levi and Fiona had raised their family was eventually turned into a museum dedicated to their work. Visitors could see Fiona's journals with her careful notations about each grave, Levi's tools for carving markers, photographs of the field through the decades. But the real memorial was always the field itself, wild and beautiful and forever blooming. Clara tended the field until she was 80, only stepping back when arthritis made it impossible to kneel and plant. Her own children took over then, and after them, their children. It became a family tradition, a sacred trust passed down through the generations. But it was not just the family who cared for the field. The whole town took ownership of it, understanding that it represented something important about who they were as a community. On the 100th anniversary of the day Levi first helped Fiona plant wildflowers, the town held a celebration in the field. Descendants of all the families who had found their loved ones through Fiona's patient research came together. They placed new flowers on old graves, told stories of their ancestors, and celebrated the legacy of two people who had decided that caring mattered. The mayor, a great-great-grandson of Senora Torres, spoke to the assembled crowd. This field exists because one woman decided that the forgotten deserved to be remembered. It thrived because one man loved her enough to help make her vision real. But it has lasted because they taught us all something important. They taught us that every life has value. They taught us that small acts of care and remembrance can change the world. They taught us that love is not just a feeling but an action, a choice we make every day to honor the dignity in ourselves and others. The crowd cheered and then fell silent as a children's choir, directed by one of Margaret's great-granddaughters, sang hymns that Fiona had loved. The voices rose sweet and clear into the New Mexico sky, carrying over the field of flowers and names, over the graves of strangers who had become family through the simple act of remembering. As the sun set on that centennial celebration, as the last light painted the wildflowers in impossible colors, it was easy to believe that Levi and Fiona were somehow still there, still tending their field, still choosing love and remembrance over forgetting. Their physical bodies rested beneath the flowers, but their spirits lived on in every bloom, every marker, every person who stopped to read a name and think about the life it represented. The story of the schoolteacher and the cowboy became the foundation myth of modern Abiquiu, the story every child learned in school, the tale that defined what the community stood for. It was a love story, yes, but it was more than that. It was a story about purpose and dignity, and the revolutionary act of caring about people the world had deemed unimportant. And every spring, without fail, the wildflowers bloomed. They spread their colors across the field in waves of red and yellow, blue and purple, white and pink. They grew thick and wild, just as Fiona had hoped they would, creating a garden that was more beautiful than any carefully manicured cemetery could ever be. They grew in memory of the forgotten dead, in honor of the woman who had first planted them, in celebration of the man who had helped her and loved her and built a life beside her. The wildflowers grew, and in their growing, they told a story. They spoke of love that transformed the world one small act at a time. They whispered of a cowboy who had planted his heart in a field of graves and found it had taken root and bloomed into something magnificent. They sang of a woman whose compassion had refused to let anyone be forgotten, who had taught an entire community what it meant to truly care. And so the garden of remembrance flourished, generation after generation, a living testament to the truth that love, real love, never dies. It only grows and spreads and blooms, again and again and again, forever reaching toward the sun.